I am Angela Rose, 29 years old. The flashbulbs burned my eyes that night, reflecting off a gown I didn't design, one I hadn't even been credited for, and worst of all, the woman wearing it, standing center stage, clutching an award that should have been mine, was my own sister, Clara. The applause thundered through the hall like waves crashing against a cliff, but all I could hear was the sound of my heart breaking in my chest. She smiled for the cameras, her perfect curls catching the golden light, and when our eyes met across the crowd, she didn't even flinch. She lifted the award higher, her lips curving into a practiced, dazzling smile that said, "This is mine now." The dress shimmered under the lights. Ivory silk draped over her frame with the same cuts, stitches, and fabric I had spent months perfecting. My design, my dream, my name erased. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. 3 months earlier, that same dress had been hanging in my tiny studio apartment, pinned to a mannequin under the glow of a single yellow lamp. The city outside my window hummed with midnight traffic, but I was too deep in creation to notice. Every detail, every stitch, every thread, was born from the kind of hunger only failure teaches you. I'd spent years chasing a name for myself in New York's cutthroat fashion scene. Always the runner-up, the forgotten face behind someone else's spotlight. But this dress, the Lune gown, was my masterpiece. It was supposed to debut at the Rising Designers Gala, a once-in-a-lifetime showcase. My chance. Clara had been there when I first sketched it, leaning over my shoulder with her sweet, practiced charm. "You're so talented, Angie," she'd said, her voice honey-smooth. "I don't know how you come up with these ideas." She'd always been the golden child, the one with the easy smile and the perfect hair. Where I fought to be seen, she was adored without effort. Our parents used to joke that she was born under a lucky star, and I under a flickering one. Still, I loved her. I wanted her to be proud of me. So when she asked if she could borrow some ideas for her own boutique's launch collection, I didn't think twice. She was my sister. Blood. Family. The betrayal came quietly, like a knife slid under silk. A week before the gala, I received an invitation email, not for my debut but for hers. Clara Rose presents The New Age of Elegance. Attached were preview images of the designs. My designs. My Lune gown, my color palette, my fabric choices, every piece of me repackaged under her name. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I called her immediately. "Clara?" My voice shook. "I just saw your promo. You used my dress." A pause. Then laughter. "Oh, that one? Come on, Angie. We've been sharing ideas for years. Don't be dramatic." Sharing ideas? I could barely breathe. "You stole my work." Her voice turned cold. "Maybe if you'd moved faster, you'd have had your chance first. The world doesn't wait, Angie. It never has." Then she hung up. I remember standing there, phone slipping from my hand, the silence of my apartment pressing down on me. My sketches lay scattered across the floor like broken promises. For the first time, I realized Clara didn't see me as a sister. She saw me as competition. The night of her show, I told myself I wouldn't go. But curiosity, no, pain, dragged me there anyway. I stood in the back row, hidden behind photographers and editors, watching my own work parade down the runway under her name. The audience gasped and applauded as the Lune gown appeared under the lights. My gown. The silk cascaded perfectly, the subtle shimmer reflecting the blue undertones of the spotlight, just as I'd envisioned it. The model twirled and the dress came alive. My creation breathed, and yet no one knew. When Clara stepped onto the stage, soaking in the adoration, she spoke into the microphone with a tearful smile. "This collection represents my journey, my vision, my heart." My hands clenched into fists. Every word felt like a bullet. My heart wasn't just broken, it was erased. I stumbled out of the venue after the show, my stomach twisting. The night air was cold, sharp against my cheeks. I walked aimlessly through the city, past glowing storefronts displaying designer gowns and glossy magazine covers, worlds I had dreamed of entering. But how could I now? My work was already out there, claimed, celebrated, owned by someone else. Someone with my last name. I sat on a bench near Bryant Park and buried my face in my hands. Around me, the city moved on, indifferent. A street musician played a soft tune on his violin, and I thought about how easily beauty could be stolen, repackaged, and sold. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You really shouldn't be out here looking like that. Someone might think you're homeless." I looked up. Clara stood there in her red coat, her hair still perfect from the show, her award tucked under her arm. She smirked. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice raw. She tilted her head, her tone playful. "I just wanted to see if you were going to congratulate me. You know, for succeeding where you couldn't." "Clara," I whispered, trembling. "How could you do this to me? We're sisters." Her smile faltered for a moment, but then she shrugged. "That's business, Angie. Maybe next time you'll learn to protect your ideas." Then she turned and walked away, leaving me under the streetlight, shattered. That night, I made a promise to myself. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. But not the kind fought with anger or fists. No. Mine would be quieter, sharper, more deliberate. I wouldn't just take back what she stole. I'd build something she could never reach. I would become everything she pretended to be. And one day, she would have to watch me rise higher than she ever dreamed. As the rain began to fall, I lifted my head, wiping my tears with shaking hands. The city glowed around me, alive and cruel and full of possibility. Somewhere in that noise, in that chaos, my redemption waited, and this time, I wouldn't let anyone steal it. The week after Clara's show was the hardest I'd ever lived through. It felt like every billboard, magazine, and social media feed in New York was plastered with her smiling face. "Clara rose, the next big voice in fashion," the headlines read. Each word dug into me like a thorn, reminding me how invisible I had been made. At first, I told myself it would blow over, that maybe the world would see the truth. But the world didn't care who created the dress. It only cared who wore it under the lights. I remember walking into the corner cafe near my apartment, desperate for air that didn't smell like failure. The barista smiled as she handed me my latte and gestured at the screen behind her. Clara's interview was playing on the morning news. "My inspiration?" Clara said, laughing perfectly on cue. "Honestly, I've always had an eye for elegance. I sketch in bed sometimes. The designs just come to me." I felt my stomach twist. She couldn't even sketch a straight line. The girl beside me at the counter whispered to her friend, "She's amazing, isn't she? So young, so talented." That was the moment I left the cafe, coffee untouched, tears stinging my eyes. At home, my studio looked like a ghost of what it had been. Half-finished designs stared back at me from their mannequins, silent witnesses to my humiliation. The Lune gown was gone, but the sketches, the prototypes, the heart behind it, those were still mine. I sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, trying to convince myself it wasn't over, that somehow I could still rebuild. But every time I picked up a pencil, my hand trembled. What was the point of creating if someone could just steal it and be applauded for it? That night, I got a call from my mom. "Angie, sweetheart," she said, her tone light, as if walking on glass. "I saw your sister's interview. Isn't she incredible?" I closed my eyes. "Mom, she stole my design." There was silence. Then a sigh. "Oh, Angela, you've always been so sensitive. Clara just works harder, that's all. Maybe next time," I hung up. The words burned worse than the theft. My own mother didn't believe me. Maybe she never had. In the weeks that followed, the injustice grew roots. Clara's face was everywhere. Talk shows, fashion magazines, radio segments. She was being invited to galas I had dreamed of attending. She even announced her new signature collection, all based on sketches she had stolen from my portfolio when she visited last. But the real twist of the knife came when I received a rejection. Email from the Rising Designers. Gala. The same event I had been preparing for. "Dear Ms. Rose, we regret to inform you that due to oversaturation in this year's category, your work will not be featured. We encourage you to apply next year. Oversaturation." That was their excuse. Yet that same night, they announced a special guest collection by none other than Clara Rose. It was official. I had been replaced. I tried to drown myself in work. Small commissions, private alterations, anything that would keep the lights on. But every order felt meaningless, I was surviving, not living. My fire had dimmed to an ember. One evening, as I worked on a client's wedding gown, I received a message from an unknown number. A link, no text, just a link. Curious, I clicked it. It led to an online interview with Clara. Except this time, she was taking credit for more than the Lune gown. She was describing the concept for a new piece, one that sounded eerily familiar. A gown I had been sketching privately just days ago. My heart dropped. How did she know? Then it hit me. My shared drive. The folder where I stored my drafts and ideas. Clara had access to it from when we'd once collaborated. The betrayal wasn't over. It was still happening. That night, I sat in my dark apartment, the city lights flickering through the window like silent witnesses. My anger was quiet at first, then it grew, hot, electric, uncontainable. I opened the folder and deleted every single shared link. Then I opened my email, typed Clara's address, and began writing. You've taken enough. I hope your conscience eats you alive. One day, the truth will catch up to you. I hit send before I could second-guess it. Seconds later, my phone rang. It was her. Angie, what's this email? Her voice was sharp, defensive. You know exactly what it is, I said. You stole from me again, she scoffed. Oh, please. You think I have time to copy your little doodles? Don't flatter yourself. I'll expose you, I said quietly. There was a pause, then laughter. Go ahead. Who do you think they'll believe? The failed sister who's never made it past local shows? Or the designer who's been on the cover of Vogue? Click. Her words echoed long after the call ended. The next morning, I met with my only friend who hadn't disappeared when my career crumbled, Marissa, a photographer who had shot my early work. We sat in her cramped studio, surrounded by lights and fabric. You can't let her win, Marissa said, slamming her coffee cup down. You have proof, right? Sketches, timestamps, drafts? Yeah, I said. But what good is proof when the industry already loves her? She leaned forward. Angela, listen to me. They love her because they don't know you, so show them who you are. Show them what she could never steal. Her words settled deep inside me. I realized then that I had two choices. Stay broken or start rebuilding. And for the first time in weeks, I chose the latter. That night, I pulled every sketch I'd ever hidden away. Designs Clara had never seen. Ideas too bold, too raw for the old me. I spread them across the floor like pieces of a puzzle, my vision returning, my pulse steadying. It wasn't just about fashion anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, my voice. I began sewing again. My hands moved like they were guided by something higher, something ancient. Stitch by stitch, I rebuilt my purpose. The injustice hadn't ended, not by a long shot, but it had lit something inside me. If Clara thought she could erase me, she was wrong. I wouldn't fight her with rage or scandal. I would fight her with brilliance. With work so powerful, the world would have no choice but to see me. Because if she wanted fame, I wanted forever. And forever, I knew, belonged to the one who created, not the one who stole. I didn't notice when night turned into morning that week. I worked without stopping, my sewing machine humming like a heartbeat in the dark. The city beyond my apartment window was quiet, sleeping, but I couldn't sleep. Not when my sister's face was still on every magazine stand. Not when her name still filled my inbox with invitations that should have been mine. One evening, as I stitched the hem of a new dress, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but the caller ID froze me. Clara rose. I hesitated, then answered. What do you want? She laughed softly. Relax. I'm calling to invite you to my event next week. The Vogue feature release party. You should come. You might learn something. You're unbelievable, I said, my throat tight. Oh, come on, Angie, it's business. Don't make this personal. You stole my life, I snapped. You took everything I worked for. She went quiet for a moment, then said flatly, No, Angela. I took what you were too weak to claim. The line went dead. That was it. The breaking point. I couldn't breathe. I threw my phone onto the couch and walked to the window, the city lights blurring behind a film of tears. Her words rang in my head, sharp and cold. Too weak to claim. She had no idea what it had cost me to build even a fragment of the dream she was now living. The endless nights, the debt, the doubt. She'd waltzed into a world I had clawed my way toward and claimed it with a smile. And no one saw the theft. No one cared. I sank to the floor, my hands trembling. For the first time, I felt rage deeper than grief, the kind that didn't just burn. It carved. If she wanted me to learn something, I would. But not from her party, from her downfall. The next day, I went to Marissa's studio, my sketches bundled under my arm. "I can't take it anymore," I said, slamming the papers onto her desk. "She's invited me to her stupid Vogue party, like she's mocking me." Marissa looked at me for a long time before speaking. "Then stop letting her mock you." "How?" She gestured toward my sketches. "By doing what she can't. You have talent, Angela. But you keep waiting for permission to use it. Stop waiting." I sat down, silent. "You know," she continued, "I've been talking to a new fashion editor at Femme Mode Weekly. They're looking for undiscovered designers to feature. If you finish a collection, something raw, personal, I could introduce you." I stared at her. "Do you think they'd even look at me?" "They will," she said, "if you give them something that makes them feel." Something inside me clicked. Maybe for the first time I wasn't chasing Clara's shadow. I was chasing my own voice. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't answer Clara's calls or texts. I worked days bled into nights. My small studio became my world again. Fabric piles grew like mountains. Coffee cups lined the counter. My fingers blistered. My back ached. But I didn't stop. This new collection wasn't glamorous. It was real. It told my story. Every gown, every stitch carried a piece of my pain, my defiance, my rebirth. I called it Phoenix. When I finished the final piece, a crimson silk gown with a sweeping train, I stood back and stared. It was everything I had ever wanted to say, but never could. On the night of Clara's Vogue event, I almost didn't go. But as I slipped into a simple black dress and looked in the mirror, I realized I needed to see it for myself. The empire built on my bones. The venue was grand, filled with crystal chandeliers and people dressed in luxury. Clara stood in the center, radiant, her laughter echoing through the room. Cameras flashed as she posed with her arm around an editor. I stayed near the edge of the crowd, invisible, until she spotted me. Well, she said, her voice honey-sweet. "You actually came." "I wanted to see it with my own eyes," I said, keeping my voice steady. She smiled thinly. "And are you proud of me?" "Proud?" I laughed softly. "You mean proud of what I built for you?" The photographers around us turned, sensing tension. Clara's smile wavered. "Careful, Angela," she whispered, her tone icy. "You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself." I leaned closer. "The only person getting embarrassed here is you, because I'm done being quiet." Then I walked away, leaving her standing there, smiling for the cameras, but pale beneath the lights. The next morning, I met Marissa at a small coffee shop. I showed her the photos of my finished collection. She flipped through them, eyes widening. "Angela, this is powerful. This isn't fashion and this is truth. I'm ready," I said. "Let's show them." That afternoon, she sent the collection to Femme Mode Weekly with a simple note. "Meet the designer who's about to redefine survival." Within 2 days, I received a reply. "We'd love to feature Angela Rose and her collection Phoenix in our upcoming issue. Her work speaks to the power of resilience." My hands shook as I read it. I wasn't erased. Not anymore. A week later, the photo shoot took place in an old warehouse bathed in sunlight. The models wore my gowns, each one fierce, defiant, alive. When I watched them move under the lights, I realized I didn't need to steal the spotlight back. I was creating a new one, and I knew, deep down, that when Clara saw it, she would understand. I wasn't the weak one. I was the storm she never saw coming. When the Femme Mode Weekly feature went live, I expected fireworks, validation, the sound of 1,000 apologies that never came. But fame didn't rush in like a storm. It arrived like a whisper. A handful of messages from local designers, a few reposts on social media, a single interview request. It wasn't failure, but it wasn't triumph either. It was the lonely middle, that place between what you deserve and what the world is ready to give. And that's where I lived for the next few months. The high from the Phoenix collection faded fast when the bills piled up again. Rent, fabric costs, equipment repairs. Every dollar I earned went right back into keeping the studio alive. There were nights I'd fall asleep at my sewing table, the hum of the city outside a cruel reminder that success in New York came to those who could afford it. Clara, of course, was thriving. Her face glowed from every screen, a constant reminder of what she had taken. One evening, after a long day of deliveries, I stopped by a newsstand to buy thread and saw her on the cover of Elle. The headline read, "Clara Rose, the innovator who changed fashion forever." My chest tightened. I bought the magazine anyway. At home, I flipped through it, half curious, half masochistic. The article was worse than I imagined. She'd been praised for pioneering minimalist couture. My designs, my identity, had become her empire. The article ended with a quote. "Inspiration comes from family," Clara said. "I've always been close to my sister Angela. She's my muse." I dropped the magazine. The words blurred through my tears. Her muse. I wasn't her muse. I was her mirror, the one she'd broken to see herself shine. After that, isolation became my companion. I stopped answering calls, even from Marissa. I stopped showing up to events. Every time I stepped into a crowd, I felt her shadow over me. There was one night I remember vividly. I came home to find an eviction notice taped to my door. The landlord had given me 2 weeks. I sat on the floor for hours, numb. The walls felt smaller than ever. My apartment, my studio, my sanctuary, all slipping away. And then, in that silence, I whispered to myself, maybe Clara was right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I was destined to watch others wear the crown I forged. The thought shattered me. I curled up beside the mannequin still draped in unfinished fabric, and I cried until the city went quiet. The next morning, I dragged myself to Marissa's studio. She took one look at me and frowned. "You look like hell." "Feels about right," I muttered. She poured me coffee and said, "You're not done." "Not yet." "I can't keep fighting ghosts, Marissa," I said softly. "I don't have the strength." "You're not fighting ghosts," she said. "You're fighting her. And she's flesh and blood like you." I shook my head. "She's untouchable. Every time I rise, she's already there, waiting to take it." Marissa leaned forward. "Then stop chasing her. Build something she can't reach." Those words sat with me all the way home. That night, I looked at my old sketchbooks. Ideas I'd abandoned when I thought the industry wanted perfection. But perfection was Clara's weapon. My strength was truth. I started sketching again. The lines came shaky at first, then bold, confident. This time I wasn't designing for the runway or critics. I was designing for survival. The new line took shape slowly, gritty, fearless, raw. Inspired not by beauty but by pain, by me. But survival wasn't glamorous. It was nights of patching old fabric, days of chasing small clients who couldn't always pay, and moments of deep, aching doubt. Still, every time I wanted to give up, I remembered what Clara had said. "You were too weak to claim it." I worked through the pain like a woman possessed. Weeks turned into months. Then one day, I got an email. "Dear Ms. Rose, we came across your Phoenix collection. We'd love to feature your work in our annual Independent Designers Showcase in Los Angeles. Please confirm your participation." I stared at the screen in disbelief. It wasn't Vogue. It wasn't Elle. But it was something. I typed my reply with trembling fingers. "I'll be there." When I told Marissa, she screamed loud enough for the whole building to hear. "Angela, this is your chance. This is your restart." I smiled, but deep down I was terrified. What if I failed again? What if no one noticed me, again? But beneath the fear, something small and fierce flickered. I wasn't that broken woman on the floor anymore. I was someone who had survived being erased. The night before the flight, I packed my designs into garment bags. The dresses hung like silent soldiers, ready for battle. Before leaving, I took one last look at my apartment. The eviction notice was gone. My studio was bare, but my heart was full of something new. Resolve. I whispered to the empty room, You can't take what's mine anymore. Los Angeles was a dream painted in sunlight. The showcase was small, intimate, but full of opportunity. I stood backstage watching the models wear my designs. Black lace, distressed satin, fire-colored silk, the story of a woman reborn. When the first model stepped out, I held my breath. The crowd didn't gasp the way they did at Clara's shows. But they listened. Every eye stayed on the runway. Every heartbeat seemed to match the rhythm of the music. And when it was over, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was real. People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, telling me how my collection felt human. One woman, a fellow designer, said, "It's rare to see truth sewn into fabric." For the first time in forever, I felt seen. That night, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to check my messages. My inbox was flooded, not with rejections, but with inquiries. Buyers, collaborators, even a small fashion magazine asking for an interview. And buried among them was one message that made my heart stop. From Clara Rose. Subject: We need to talk. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady. The sister who had stolen my world was reaching out again. And for once, I wasn't afraid. This wasn't the beginning of another fall. It was the start of her reckoning. The message from Clara sat unopened in my inbox for 3 days. I read the subject line, "We need to talk," over and over, but I refused to click it. She had stolen too much of my peace already. Instead, I poured all my energy into preparing for what came next. The showcase in Los Angeles had lit a spark, and the small ripples it caused were beginning to reach unexpected shores. I received an email from a boutique fashion agency in Paris. They wanted to collaborate on a capsule collection inspired by Phoenix. For the first time, I felt the power shifting. But with opportunity came doubt. The old fears crept in, whispers telling me I didn't belong, that I was still just the sister in the shadows. One afternoon, Marissa caught me pacing around the studio, papers scattered everywhere. "Angela," she said, grabbing my shoulders, "you've been through hell. You earned this. Don't let fear make you small again." I nodded, but my voice cracked when I said, "What if it's not enough? What if she comes for this too?" Marissa smiled faintly. "Then let her try. Because this time you're ready." Her words anchored me. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, not in revenge, but in strength. Still, curiosity eventually won. I opened Clara's email. "Angela, I saw your feature in Femme Mode. Congratulations. You must be happy to finally have some recognition. I think we should meet. There are things we need to clear up." Clara, it was short, almost polite, but I could read the panic between the lines. She'd seen me rising again. And she didn't like it. I didn't reply. A week later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. Clara standing at a charity gala, wearing a gown almost identical to one from my Phoenix collection. I froze. She did it again. But this time, I wasn't powerless. I had every original sketch, every digital timestamp, every pattern file. This wasn't just theft anymore, it was proof. I called Marissa immediately. She copied me again, I said. There was silence, then her voice hardened. "Then it's time to stop playing nice. Let's make this public." The next morning, Marissa posted a side-by-side comparison on her photography page. One image of my original design from Phoenix, and one of Clara's so-called charity gown. The caption read, "When authenticity meets imitation, the difference is in the details." Within hours, the post blew up. Comments poured in from designers, stylists, and even journalists. "Wait, isn't that Angela Rose's design? I remember this from the Femme Mode shoot. How is Clara wearing it now?" The whispers started to turn into questions. 3 days later, my phone rang again. This time, from a number I recognized immediately. "Angela," Clara said, her voice low, tight. "You need to take that post down. Why? Because people are finally seeing the truth? You're ruining my reputation." "You ruined mine years ago," I said. She exhaled shakily. "Listen, you don't know what you're doing. This could destroy us both." Only one of us built anything worth destroying. Click. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city outside buzzed with energy, but my apartment felt suspended in silence. I stared at the sketches pinned on my wall, at the old wounds stitched into every seam, and I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about watching her fall. It was about standing tall, in the truth, in the work, in the light she tried to take from me. For the first time, I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted to reclaim myself completely. The next morning, I got an unexpected call from Julien Moreau, the Parisian designer who had reached out before. "Angela," he said in a lilting accent, "your story, it's powerful. The world needs to see the woman behind Phoenix. I want to feature your work at Paris Fashion Week." I nearly dropped the phone. "Paris Fashion Week?" "Yes, but it won't be easy. You'll need funding, materials, and a team." "I don't have any of that," I admitted. "Then find it," he said simply, "because your name belongs on that stage." For days I scrambled, calling vendors, reaching out to small investors, borrowing money I didn't have. Every door that slammed pushed me harder. Marissa became my right hand, coordinating shoots, handling contacts, keeping me grounded. One night, after a long day of failed meetings, I sat on the studio floor surrounded by swatches. "It's impossible," I whispered. Marissa kneeled beside me. "Angela, do you remember what you said after Clara stole your design? You said no one could take what was yours anymore. So stop talking like a victim." Something in me shifted. I stood, picked up my shears and said, "Then let's make history." The next month was chaos. I barely slept. My apartment looked like a battlefield. Fabrics draped across furniture, spools rolling across the floor. But my designs came alive piece by piece, like they had been waiting for this moment. Every gown told a story, not of pain, but of rebirth. I called the collection Resurgence. On the night before my flight to Paris, I received another email from Clara. "I see what you're doing. Don't forget who helped you start. You'll always be the little sister following my lead." I smiled bitterly and hit delete. No response, no closure, just silence. The kind that comes from knowing you no longer owe anyone an explanation. Paris was a whirlwind. The air felt charged with possibility. My collection was small compared to the giants showing that week, but it was mine. Honest, fearless, unfiltered. When the lights dimmed and the first model stepped onto the runway, I felt something inside me heal. The audience didn't just see dresses. They saw me, the woman who had been broken, erased, and reborn. When the final look appeared, a shimmering gold gown embroidered with the word "Rise," the crowd erupted, and in that moment, I understood power isn't something people give you. It's something you reclaim. Paris changed something in me. The moment the runway lights dimmed and the audience stood to applaud, I felt like I had finally stepped out of Clara's shadow. But even victories carry echoes of old wounds, and mine were whispering warnings. Clara wasn't going to stay silent forever. When I returned to New York, her presence was everywhere again. My success had awakened her anger. She started spreading stories through mutual contacts, that I had copied her ideas, that my Paris debut was a sympathy stunt. I should have been furious. Instead, I smiled, because this time, I was ready for her games. I had learned something in Paris. Power wasn't in fighting back loud. It was in moving silently, strategically. I was no longer the sister scrambling to defend herself. I was the woman setting a stage. Marissa and I met at my studio one evening. The air smelled of thread, fabric dye, and espresso, my war scents. She dropped her bag on the table and said, "You've been quiet since we got back. What's going on in that head of yours?" "I'm going to end it," I said. She blinked. "End what?" "This war. For good." Marissa crossed her arms. "And how exactly do you plan to end Clara Rose?" I looked at her and smiled, slow and deliberate. By letting her destroy herself. The first move was patience. I stopped engaging. I ignored Clara's comments, refused interviews that wanted to compare the sisters, and focused on building my next collection. It was called Reflection. Fitting, since it was about facing the truth beneath the glamour. Behind the scenes, though, I started gathering things, Proof. Every sketch I'd made that she'd stolen, every contract she'd twisted to her advantage, every old email where she'd undermined me. I had them all. But I wasn't hoarding them for court or revenge articles. No. I wanted timing to do the damage for me. A few weeks later, my invitation arrived. The annual Rose Gala, hosted by none other than Clara herself. The irony almost made me laugh. She'd always thrown these events, part charity, part self-worship. But this year the theme was family legacy, the perfect stage. Marissa's jaw dropped when I told her I planned to go. "Angela, that's walking into the lion's den." "Maybe," I said, folding the invitation carefully. But this time, I brought a mirror. The night of the gala, I wore a custom gown of my own design, a midnight blue dress, threaded with silver embroidery that shimmered like constellations. It wasn't loud, but it demanded attention. When I arrived, the room hushed for a moment. The chandeliers glittered, the air buzzed with wealth and perfume. Clara stood across the room, laughing for the cameras, her arm looped through a wealthy investor's. When she saw me, her smile faltered just slightly before she composed herself. "Angela," she said, sweeping toward me, champagne glass in hand. "I'm surprised you came." "I wouldn't miss it," I said calmly. She tilted her head. "I hope you're here to celebrate, not stir things up." "I'm here for the same reason you are," I replied. "To honor family." For a moment, her mask slipped. Then she laughed, that fake sound she'd perfected over years of pretending. "Always the dramatic one," she said. "Enjoy the night, sister." I watched her glide away, surrounded by photographers and admirers. The entire event was choreographed for her. Every spotlight, every speech, every flattering camera angle. But I noticed the cracks. Her assistant was frantic, her publicist whispering in her ear too often. She was unraveling, even if no one else saw it yet. Around 9 p.m., when the champagne was flowing freely, the host called Clara on stage to give her annual speech. I moved quietly to the side of the room, near the tech booth. Marissa stood beside me, her eyes wide. "You're sure about this?" she whispered. I nodded. "Completely." The speech began like every other. Fake gratitude, polished anecdotes, that perfect smile. "Family," Clara said, her voice echoing through the speakers. "It's the thread that binds us all. My sister Angela has been an inspiration to me my entire life." That was my cue. I nodded to the technician, who had been briefed and paid days earlier. The projector behind Clara flickered, and the screen lit up with images. My images, side-by-side comparisons of my original designs and Clara's stolen replicas. Emails where she'd submitted my sketches under her name, screenshots of her contracts claiming joint ownership over my work. The crowd gasped. Clara froze, her microphone still in her hand. "Turn it off," she snapped at the technician. But it was too late. The images kept rolling, each one a quiet, damning confession. The whispers started, the kind that sliced sharper than any blade. "Those are Angela's designs, right? She said they were her own. I heard her sister was the real artist." Clara's face went pale. I stepped forward, my voice calm but loud enough to reach her. "You always said I was too weak to claim what was mine. I just did." The room went silent. Cameras turned. The investors who once worshipped her were already stepping back. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I walked out into the night air, the sound of her voice cracking behind me as she tried to regain control of the crowd. Marissa followed me out, half laughing, half crying. "You really did it," she said. I looked up at the stars glittering above the New York skyline. "No," I said softly. "She did it to herself." The next morning, social media exploded. Every major fashion blog had clips of the gala leak. The video of Clara's speech, the projection behind her, the stunned faces in the crowd. The real Rose trended for 3 days. Clara released a statement calling it a misunderstanding, but the damage was irreversible. Investors pulled out. Contracts were frozen. Within a week, her brand's reputation was in free fall. And mine? My inbox was full. Designers wanted to collaborate. Buyers wanted exclusives. Even international agencies that had ignored me before were calling now. But the best message came from Femme Mode Weekly. "We'd like to run a feature titled The Sister Who Stitched the Truth." I smiled at the screen. Revenge wasn't supposed to taste this sweet. But it did. That night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights reflect off the glass. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Clara's empire was crumbling, not because I'd destroyed it, but because it was built on lies. And I'd learned that truth, once revealed, doesn't need to scream. It simply shines. The morning after the gala, the fashion world trembled. Screens buzzed, headlines screamed, and the empire of Clara Rose began to crumble under its own weight. "Angela, you're trending," Marissa said, bursting into my studio with her phone in hand. Her eyes were wide, part shock, part pride. "You broke her." I looked up from my sewing table. The hum of the machine had been my calm for days. But now the sound felt like a victory song. "She broke herself," I said quietly. I just held up the mirror. Within 48 hours, Clara's sponsors began cutting ties. Luxury brands pulled her collections from shelves. Influencers who once wore her gowns for free now deleted their posts, distancing themselves from the scandal. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. My silence spoke louder than any interview could, but the world wasn't content with silence. It wanted a voice. My voice. Every morning, my inbox filled with requests. Podcasts, magazines, journalists. They all wanted to hear from the woman who had exposed one of fashion's biggest betrayals. Marissa urged me to choose carefully. "You don't need to tell everything," she said. "Tell your story your way," I agreed. And for once, my story wouldn't start with her. A week later, I sat in front of a camera for an interview with the Modern Muse, one of the most respected fashion channels on YouTube. The host, a soft-spoken woman named Elise, smiled warmly. "Angela," she said, "you've become the face of resilience in the fashion world. How does it feel to finally be seen for your own work?" I took a deep breath. "It's surreal," I said. "For years I worked in silence, and someone else took the credit. I used to think my voice didn't matter, but I've learned that truth has a way of finding its way out, even through stitches and scars." Elise leaned forward. "Your sister hasn't made a public appearance since the gala. Do you feel sorry for her?" The question hung heavy in the air. I looked straight into the camera. "No," I said softly, "because remorse comes from empathy, and she never had any." The interview went viral. Within hours, it hit 1 million views. The comment section was flooded, people cheering, crying, confessing their own betrayals. This woman deserves the world. Her calm revenge is pure art. I wish I could be this strong. But what moved me most was one comment that simply said, "She turned pain into power. That's real beauty." Meanwhile, Clara was unraveling in public. Her attempts at damage control only made things worse. One morning, I woke up to a video of her on a talk show, her makeup smudged, her voice trembling. "They're painting me as a monster," she said. "I built my success from nothing. Angela had help. She's lying." The audience didn't applaud. They looked uncomfortable. The host asked gently, "But isn't it true that some of your early designs match your sister's sketches?" Clara froze. "Coincidence!" she snapped. The clip spread like wildfire, with side-by-side images flooding social media again. It was over for her. Truly over. But my rise didn't come without guilt. Late at night, when the city lights dimmed, I'd catch myself wondering if I'd gone too far. Had I destroyed her, or just forced her to face the truth? I'd lie awake remembering our childhood, 2 girls sewing scraps of fabric into dolls' clothes, dreaming of Paris runways. Somewhere along the way, those dreams turned into weapons. Still, I knew one thing. I hadn't started the war. I'd just finished it. Then came the call that would change everything. "Angela, this is Isabelle Laurent from Vogue Paris." I almost dropped my phone. "We saw your Resurgence collection in Paris and your interview with Modern Muse. We'd like to feature you in our upcoming issue, The New Faces of Fashion Integrity." I sat there, speechless, Vogue, the pinnacle, the dream, Isabel continued. We want to do something unprecedented, a cover story. Your designs, your message. Tears blurred my vision. I whispered, yes. 1,000 times. Yes. The next few weeks were a blur of fittings, interviews, and photo shoots. Every detail mattered. Not because I wanted perfection, but because I finally had ownership. The day of the shoot, I stood in front of the camera in a white silk suit, strong, clean, unapologetic. The photographer clicked away, the lights flashing like fireworks. Between takes, Isabel walked over to me and said, "You know, Clara once pitched a feature to us years ago." We passed. I smiled faintly. Life has a way of rewriting stories. When the issue dropped, my face filled magazine racks across the city. The headline read, "Angela Rose, the woman who redefined resilience." I bought a copy, sat in a small cafe and stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed softly, thinking about all the nights I'd cried over my sister's success, how I used to dream of being on a cover, any cover, even if it meant sharing it with her. Now, it was just me. And it felt earned. Clara, on the other hand, disappeared from the spotlight completely. Rumors spread that she'd sold her brand, that she'd moved overseas, that she was trying to find herself, but I didn't chase the rumors. Her silence was enough. The world was finally seeing me, not as her sister, not as her victim, but as Angela Rose, the designer who rose from the ashes she once created. A month after the Vogue release, I received an anonymous package. Inside was one of our childhood sketches, a crayon drawing of 2 little girls holding hands beside a dress. No note. Just that. I traced the lines with my fingers and felt something soften inside me. The war was over. The scars would remain, but they no longer defined me. That night, I walked onto my balcony, the city glittering beneath me. I thought about every betrayal, every humiliation, every sleepless night. They had all led me here. To peace, to power, to myself. And as the wind carried the faint hum of New York below, I whispered, "You were wrong, Clara. I didn't need you to believe in me. I just needed to believe in myself." The week after the Vogue cover dropped, my life transformed completely. My inbox was a flood of collaborations, invitations, and proposals. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who stitched the truth. But what mattered most to me wasn't the attention. It was the shift. The same industry that once dismissed me now wanted to hear me, and I intended to make that count. I wasn't just a designer anymore. I had become a symbol, and symbols, I realized, had power. It began with an email from the Global Fashion Forum, an annual conference where only the top voices in the industry spoke. They wanted me to give a keynote speech on ethics, creativity, and the cost of silence. Marissa nearly dropped her coffee when I told her, "Angela, this is huge. You'll be speaking alongside people who've been legends since before you were born." I laughed nervously. "That's what terrifies me." "Then terrify them right back," she said. "You've earned this." The night before the event, I barely slept. My notes sat on the table, but I couldn't look at them. My mind kept drifting, to Clara, to our childhood, to the first time I'd ever sewn something that made me proud. I had always dreamed of making something beautiful, not tearing someone down. But maybe this truth-telling was beauty too. The auditorium was packed. Spotlights bathed the stage in warmth, and cameras flashed from every angle. My palms were damp as I stepped up to the podium. "Good morning," I began, my voice shaking just slightly. "I'm Angela Rose. Some of you know me because of what happened last year, the scandal, the headlines. But I'm not here to talk about that." The room quieted. "I'm here to talk about what happens when we let silence win, when we let someone else speak for our talent, our worth, our truth." A hush fell. I continued, feeling the tremor in my voice fade. "For years I believed that being quiet made me strong, that being agreeable kept peace. But all it did was teach others how to erase me. And when I finally spoke up, I learned something. Truth doesn't destroy. It rebuilds." There was a pause. then soft applause that swelled into a roar. After the speech, a line of people formed: editors, designers, students. Some thanked me, some cried. One young designer with trembling hands told me, "I almost quit after someone stole my designs. You made me believe I can start again." That was when I knew. My story had grown beyond revenge. It had become a voice for others who'd been silenced. In the following months, I launched a mentorship program for young women in fashion, especially those who couldn't afford school or connections. I called it the Phoenix Collective. Marissa helped manage it, and every week we met a dozen new girls, their eyes full of hunger and hope. Some had been ignored, others humiliated by mentors who took their ideas. I saw my younger self in every one of them. One afternoon, during a session, a girl named Alina asked softly, "Miss Rose, would you ever forgive the person who stole from you?" Her question lingered. "I think forgiveness," I said slowly, "isn't about excusing them. It's about freeing yourself. Some people never apologize, but you can still decide they don't own your piece anymore." She smiled faintly, and I realized I truly meant it. But peace never stays undisturbed. One morning, while reviewing fabric samples in my studio, Marissa walked in, her face pale. "You should see this," she said, handing me her phone. It was an article. Exclusive. Clara Rose declares bankruptcy. Former designer accuses industry of hypocrisy. The article quoted her bitterly. They turned on me because I made one mistake. The same people who praised me crucified me. My sister destroyed everything. I put the phone down. Marissa watched me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. I thought I'd feel satisfied, but I don't. I just feel done. Because in truth, revenge had long since stopped being my motivation. My success wasn't about her downfall anymore. It was about the woman I'd become through it. A month later, the Phoenix Collective held its first fashion showcase. The young designers displayed their collections, and the auditorium buzzed with energy and emotion. When the final model walked the runway, wearing a piece inspired by resurgence, the audience stood to applaud. I looked around and saw my mother in the front row, tears streaming down her face. "You made it, sweetheart," she whispered when she hugged me afterward. For the first time, those words didn't feel like approval. They felt like truth. That night, as I packed up the studio, the door creaked open. A figure stepped in, hesitant, quiet. Clara. She looked nothing like the woman from magazine covers. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes simple. She looked human. I froze. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the showcase," she said softly. "It was beautiful." "Thank you." There was a silence, heavy, trembling. "I lost everything," she said finally. "And maybe I deserved it. But I wanted you to know, I'm sorry." It was the first time I had ever heard those words from her. I looked at her, the sister who'd once been my rival, my betrayer, my ghost. And I realized that anger no longer had power over me. "I don't hate you anymore," I said, "but I don't need you to be sorry for me to move on." She nodded, tears glistening. "You always were stronger than me." And then she left, fading into the night like the end of a storm. Weeks later, as I sat at my desk sketching, I found myself smiling, not out of pride, but peace. My story had come full circle. I had been betrayed, broken, rebuilt. I had seen the worst in people and the best in myself, and through it all, I had learned that revenge isn't justice. Truth is, when Vogue asked me for a follow-up piece, they titled it perfectly, From Rivalry to Redemption, Angela Rose's Legacy of Light. And for once, I didn't flinch at the word legacy, because I had finally built one worth leaving behind. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed felt almost sacred. My studio no longer buzzed with tension or exhaustion. It thrummed with focus, warmth, and peace. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating bolts of fabric in colors that once symbolized chaos, scarlet, gold, silver, but now spoke of rebirth. It had been a year since the gala, a year since my sister's empire collapsed, and my name became synonymous with truth. Yet as the days turned into months, I learned that success isn't loud. It doesn't roar. Sometimes, it hums softly, like a heart finally beating in rhythm again. One afternoon, while cleaning out old drawers in the studio, I found a worn-out notebook tucked beneath a pile of sketchbooks. Its pages were crinkled, covered in pencil smudges, my earliest designs, the ones I made before everything fell apart. There, in fading ink, I had written, "One day, I'll make something beautiful enough to heal." I smiled, tracing the words with my finger. I didn't realize then how much pain would come before that healing. The phone buzzed beside me. A message from Marissa. "Lunch later? You've been hiding in the studio again." I laughed. She was right. Work had become my way of processing everything. The pain, the forgiveness, the freedom. Later, at our favorite cafe, Marissa slid into the seat across from me, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair. "You look different," she said. "Older?" "Calmer," she corrected, like someone who finally stopped fighting ghosts. I stirred my coffee, thinking about that. "Maybe because the ghosts stopped chasing me," I said. "Or because you stopped letting them," she countered. Smiling, she wasn't wrong. That evening, I attended the grand opening of a new exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum, The Evolution of Modern Design. Several of my pieces were featured, displayed alongside some of the world's most influential creators. I walked through the gallery quietly, listening to the soft murmur of admiration from strangers. Couple paused in front of a gown from my collection, the same design that had symbolized the turning point in my life. "It's like it tells a story," the woman whispered. "You can feel it, the pain, the triumph." I smiled faintly. They didn't know they were describing me. After the event, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights shimmered, each one reminding me of a choice I'd made: to rise instead of retreat, to create instead of crumble. I pulled out my phone and opened the Phoenix Collective group chat. The young designers had been sending updates all evening, photos of new prototypes, job offers, joyful chaos. Alina. "Miss Rose, my first collection got accepted at the local showcase. Thank you for believing in me." Nadia. "I finally quit that job that stole my ideas. Starting my own line tomorrow." Clara. "You taught me that my voice matters. I'll never forget that." Tears welled in my eyes. Their success meant more to me than any award. In the months that followed, life found its rhythm again. I traveled, taught, and designed with a new purpose. Every stitch, every line was no longer about proving my worth. It was about celebrating it. Occasionally, Clara's name would surface. Someone would mention seeing her at a small boutique overseas, helping a local artist launch a line. It surprised me, but it didn't sting. Maybe she had finally found humility, or at least peace. One day, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small photograph. 2 little girls sitting cross-legged on a floor, surrounded by scraps of fabric. Clara and me, written on the back in her handwriting. "We were happiest when we were creating. I hope you never stop." For a moment, I just stared at it, my chest tightening. Then I smiled. I pinned the photo above my desk, not as a reminder of pain, but of where everything began. When the Phoenix Collective held its second showcase, I stood backstage watching my students take the runway. Their designs were daring, raw, full of truth, and I realized I'd helped them find what took me years to discover: that real power doesn't come from revenge, but from reclaiming your story. After the final walk, they pulled me onto the stage chanting, "Speech, speech." I took the mic, heart pounding, and said, "A year ago, I thought justice meant seeing someone fall. But now I know. Justice is watching others rise." The crowd erupted into applause. That night back home, I sat on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The stars were faint, drowned by city lights, but I could still see a few stubborn ones shining through. I thought of every person who had doubted me, every betrayal that had broken me, and every step that brought me here. I whispered into the night, "Thank you," because if I hadn't been torn down, I might never have learned how to rebuild myself. A few weeks later, Time Style magazine featured a profile titled Angela Rose, the woman who stitched back her soul. In it, the interviewer asked, "What do you want people to remember you for?" I answered honestly, not for the revenge, for the resilience. And that became the heart of everything I did afterward. The collections, the mentorships, the speeches. Each one stitched a little more hope into a world that desperately needed it. As the seasons changed, my studio evolved too. The walls were filled with art from my students, sketches of dreams that hadn't been realized yet but would be. I often worked late into the night, the hum of the city mixing with the quiet rustle of fabric. One evening, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The same mirror I'd once stood before, doubting everything I was. Now I saw someone whole, someone healed. And when I finally turned off the lights and closed the door behind me, I realized something profound. Revenge had never been my real story. Redemption was. When people talk about revenge, they imagine fire, anger burning until the ashes of betrayal are gone. But when I look back, I realize that revenge isn't the fire. It's the light you find after it goes out. The quiet glow that reminds you who you are when no one else believed in you. A year and a half had passed since my life changed. I no longer introduced myself as Angela Rose, the woman whose sister stole from her. I was just Angela Rose, the designer, the mentor, the woman who learned to rise. The world still spoke my name, but now it was in reverence, not pity. My designs were sold globally. The Phoenix Collective had expanded to 3 countries, and I had just signed a contract to collaborate with a sustainable fashion house in Milan. But despite everything, I never forgot where I came from, or the pain that shaped me. One afternoon, I stood in my studio surrounded by my new collection, one that was deeply personal. Each piece represented a stage of healing: grief, anger, acceptance, peace. The final gown, pure ivory with threads of gold, was called The Return. It symbolized the woman I became, the one who could walk back into the fire and not be burned. Marissa stepped inside, her eyes widening as she saw it. "Angela, this is your masterpiece," I smiled. "It's the last piece of the story," she nodded knowingly. "So what's next?" "Something quieter," I said. "Something kinder, because I no longer wanted to fight the world. I wanted to help others find their strength before it was taken from them." That night, as the city glowed beneath my balcony, I opened my laptop and began writing. The title at the top of the document was simple: The Woman Who Stitched Back Her Soul. It wasn't a tell-all or an exposé. It was a letter to anyone who had ever been silenced, doubted, or betrayed. I wrote about the nights I cried until my sketches blurred under tears. About the moment I realized power doesn't come from being loud, but from being unbreakable. And I wrote about Clara, not as the villain, but as the mirror that forced me to confront everything I'd ignored in myself. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to deliver the closing speech at the International Women's Empowerment Gala. The theme that year was The Art of Rebuilding. It felt almost poetic. The night of the event, I wore the return. The gold threads shimmered under the soft light as I walked to the stage, my heels echoing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The audience was vast, hundreds of women from around the world, each carrying their own story of pain and resilience. When I reached the podium, I paused, letting the silence settle. Then I spoke. I used to think my life was over when I was betrayed, that everything I worked for had been stolen beyond repair. But I was wrong. Betrayal doesn't destroy us. It introduces us to ourselves. It strips away illusions until all that's left is truth. And from truth we build again. I looked out into the crowd. Faces glistened with tears, with understanding. I learned that success isn't revenge. It's healing loudly enough that no one's cruelty can drown you out. So to anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, listen carefully. You are not defined by what they took from you. You're defined by what you choose to rebuild. The room erupted in applause. I took a deep breath, feeling something within me finally release. After the gala, women approached me, strangers who hugged me like sisters, whispering, "Thank you." One even said, "You helped me forgive someone I thought I never could." And I realized then that this was the real ending, not vengeance, not triumph, but connection. When I returned home that night, a soft rain was falling over New York. I stepped onto the balcony, letting the droplets kiss my face. The city glowed beneath me, alive and endless. I thought of Clara again. I hadn't seen her since that night she visited the studio. Maybe she had found her own peace somewhere far away. I hoped she had, because I finally had mine. Inside, the return hung on its mannequin, the gold threads catching the dim light. I approached it slowly, running my fingers along the fabric. I whispered, "We did it, not just to the dress, but to the woman I used to be, the one who refused to stay broken." As the rain softened into mist, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the reflections dance across the glass. My phone buzzed, a message from Vogue. "Angela, we'd love to do a feature titled The Power of Forgiveness. Would you be open to sharing your next chapter?" I smiled, typing back, "Yes. But this time, it's not about what I lost. It's about what I found." Weeks later, that article became one of the most shared pieces of the year. They called it The Quiet Revolution of Angela Rose. And maybe that's what it was. A revolution not of noise, but of grace. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I didn't need to be louder, bigger, stronger than anyone else. I just needed to keep creating, keep living truthfully, keep forgiving, again and again. Months later, I stood before a new class of young designers at the Phoenix Collective. I looked into their eager faces and said, "When people betray you, they think they're ending your story. But the truth is they're just handing you the pen. What you write next, that's your power." Their eyes glowed with hope, and I knew my work wasn't finished. It was only beginning. That night, I closed the door to my studio and turned off the lights. For a moment, I stood there, surrounded by the echoes of all the versions of me that had existed, naive, wounded, furious, and now, whole. And with a quiet smile, I said out loud, "This is my story. Every tear, every thread, every victory. I wouldn't change a thing. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, the people who break us are just the ones who teach us how to shine again." Moral reflection. Because healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about remembering who you became after it did. Final question to the audience. What would you do if the person who doubted you the most became the reason you finally found yourself?